Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, and you're listening to Incredible Life Creator Podcast. My guest today is Andrea Samadi. Andrea is a former middle school teacher from Toronto, Canada, now living in Arizona, and has spent the past 20 years working with students and social emotional learning. She participates in ongoing mentoring with some of the top neuroscience researchers in the country and has developed an online program to inspire student voice, well-being, and innovation using the most current brain research and neuroscience techniques. Andrea knows firsthand about stress in the classroom, as her first job out of the University of Toronto's Faculty of Education was a behavioral class. She felt overwhelmed and frustrated by the lack of resources to help her manage and teach her students. And so she set out on a mission to find ways to support students and educators in the classroom. Welcome to the podcast, Andrea.
Hi, Kimberly. Thanks so much for having me today.
Yes, so why don't we start out by you telling us a little bit about you, where you grew up, where you started out, how you got into all this.
Well, it's funny. Nothing happens on purpose. Usually things are all by chance. So I was growing up, I lived in Toronto, Canada, and my next door neighbor, he seemed to have a different color sports car every day. He was driving in with a black sports car, white sports car. So I asked him what he did for a living, and he didn't answer me. He just handed me this book. It was Bob Proctor's You Were Born Rich, and not so much rich in finances, but rich in potential. And at the time I was a school teacher, and I read that behind my binder in a staff meeting. And that's really where everything changed for me. I saw that, I was struggling with my students in the classroom, had a behavioral class, like you mentioned, and I thought there's got to be more that I can do. And when I started to read this book, I thought, I'm not using all the potential that I know I have. And it just opened my eyes to more awareness. So that's really where it began. I quit my teaching job and I went to work for this speaker as a sales rep and traveled around the US, which is really what brought me to move from Toronto to Arizona. So that's really in a nutshell where it all started.
Wow. Okay. So you were working with this speaker, you traveled all over, you moved to Arizona. What happened once you got to Arizona? Did you continue working for the speaker? Because you're doing something different today.
Absolutely. Well, September 11th happened. So that's really where everything shifted for me. I had this, I was at the time, had this vision of building these programs under the arm of the speaker. And so he had a youth program, and I watched these kids skyrocket their success. And I worked hand in hand with him creating content. So I really saw that that's where I would end up. And then September 11th happened. I moved to Arizona, bam, a few months after I moved in May, and then September, the whole world changed, and no one was going to seminars, no one was getting on airplanes. And I quickly had to figure out, what was I going to do? Was I going to go back home and say, well, it didn't work out, or was I going to figure it out? And I thought, I've got to figure it out, because I didn't want to go back. And so I ended up getting a job as a nanny at a local resort, and cleaned houses. Really, that's really where it started. I thought, I've got to continue building and writing the curriculum that I was doing for the speaker, write it for myself. And I broke away from the speaker, which was a good thing. It was hard at the time. You have all this support and all these connections, and it was scary being in a new country, but I had a lot of support. I had a lot of people in the seminar industry that wanted to see me win. It wasn't like I was all on my own. I had people that wanted to help me out. And so that's really where it began for me, breaking from the speaker and starting my own curriculum, which was The Secret for Teens, was the first book that I wrote. And that was the book that I launched into the schools. And when I got into the schools in Arizona, I partnered with the Department of Ed. They chose my programs, and it was there that the educators told me what they wanted. They said, I really want this to be brain-based. I want you to research Carol Dweck. And it was the customer really that told me the direction that I was to go. But of course, I had to start doing something somewhere. I couldn't just launch, be in the schools and be successful. I kind of melded to where I am today.
Yeah. And how did you put those into the schools? Were you teaching the teachers?
Yes. So once there came a time when there was an application process, and I followed what was going on. There was really at that time, 2012, 2013, there was only one character program. It was all the schools used it, and there was a need for more variety. So as soon as I saw that, I actually worked for an educational publisher at the time, so I knew the process of vetting out a product. To a corporation to get into where I wanted to go. And so I just presented my ideas in a meeting. When they chose us, then there was grant money available. So then you had to go out to all the schools and show them what your program was for them to want to work with you. So that's really where it started. I first of all had to get on this preferred vendor list, which I was. I was one of 5 companies that they chose to expand from just this one character program. And then once I was in, then I had to go out, go drive around to all the schools, say, this is the program, we're approved. Do you want to apply for this grant? Once they liked the program, then we got the grant money for those schools. So that's really where it first started getting funded. So once the funding came in, that's when I could really improve. So I had some money behind the idea, and I could go and create the online membership area, get all the research. When the educator said, well, I want to go this way, I had to hire a neuroscience researcher. So that's where the funds went to expanding and improving the original idea, which really was not that pretty. If I look back at what I created, I learned to code my own website. When my kids were little, I learned from a 16-year-old kid from Chicago who would call me after his high school classes, and he would teach me how to code these websites that didn't look that great. Now it looks a lot better. Templates are a lot better, but back then, it wasn't pretty, but it was the way I started.
Yeah, and we all start somewhere. So,
Exactly.
and now you've been doing this for 20 years. So tell me a little bit about what the program actually is and what it does and what's the benefits to the students.
Definitely. So it started out that of course there was grant funding. So it was a character and leadership program. And I had to create the curriculum for what the grant was. So when grant money is coming out, you've got to really tailor it for that purpose. So there's character lessons in there like trustworthiness, integrity, and then there's the program that I wrote that melds into it. So it's a video and then a lesson. The video can go up on a smart board. The teacher has a manual and they can use it in the classroom that way. Then when the brain research came in, I created a second part of the course. So there's an educator portal that has 60 online lessons that go with a book, the Level Up book. And then there's a teacher training component that talks now about how the brain works, how stress impacts the brain and learning, because in order for this to work successfully, we've got to go at that angle of starting with the educator first. And then I started to see the connection between social emotional learning. So things like mindset, responsible decision making, self-awareness. So that's when I tied the social emotional learning into it, which is really where the podcast came from. I'd say 2014, 15, I started to come up with a curriculum for the teachers, and I started presenting it in different school districts in Canada, the US, and I got such an interest. People were really interested in this topic, but I still was before my time. It was like people were, just really getting around to going into the brain and learning, and now it's really skyrocketing. So that's where I think the podcast is having so much success, because people are ready for it. But when I first started presenting it, I got a lot of people that were just like, just trying to think about these ideas. If I think back to when I first was told you've got to understand how the brain works from that educator, I had never thought about how my brain worked. And so then it was really hard for me to understand the 3 parts of the brain when I was learning it from this neuroscience researcher. And I'm sure he thought, this girl is not going to get this because of the look on my face when he was teaching it to me. But then you take the information, you consolidate it, you put it into action, and we can learn anything that we want. So that's really the two parts to it. There's the student side and the educator side, and it's available, as well as now thinking about the workplace, that these skills do translate not just into the schools, but into the workplace.
Got it. So if a teacher were implementing it in the classroom, she would just have like a section of classroom time for that particular class, like they have math and they have science, and then they would have
Well,
brain work.
there's a little bit more involved in where it goes, and I got that experience from starting it out. So usually a district would have to be on board, first of all, with having a program in the school. Then they've got to get together with the teachers and decide where it's going to fit, whether there's like a life skills section or program that they've got that they'll put it into. So it's really an individual school site's decision as to where it would go, because of the fact that there's so much demands on the teachers for core curriculum. Even though we can prove with research that social emotional lessons increase the students' academics by 11 points, the research is now out and it's very clear, but it's still difficult to figure out where it's going to go. So that would be the decision of that school, and usually it would come from the district side. We would meet together to figure out, if they wanted a program, where it's going to go, at what time it would fit in.
Mm-hmm. So you're working with the schools, and then you're also working with companies?
There's a lot of different angles. So a corporation would also say, well, I'm interested in implementing a social intelligence program in our company. And so these skills all translate over, whether it's in a school or a workplace, they all translate over. So absolutely the programs can go into a corporation.
So in a corporation, is the benefit that they're just getting more done, they're more productive? Is it that they're getting along with each other better? What is the benefit when you're working with companies?
So there's a lot. So, as we go into a corporate team, I think about when I worked in the corporate world, there's an identity that's formed in a corporation, and sometimes things happen, and stress happens within a company, just like it would happen in a school. Students are misbehaving. It's the same thing in a corporation. So you've got to find ways and to work with each other. Learn these basic skills that we weren't taught in school: self-regulation, how to get along with others, important ways to communicate. And so it would just be improving the corporate identity and culture with these skills. And it really is an individual, everyone would work on it at their own pace within the company. And so then obviously once you have those skills in a company, then productivity improves. And you can always see the employees that do well. If I look back, the ones that are going to hit their yearly quota, they're always the ones that have that emotional intelligence. They're the ones that understand how to get along with others, whether it's in the office or it's outside of the office. They're the ones with the charisma. They just know how things work. And these are not skills that we all have to work at them at all times. We just don't have naturally.
That's true. And I can see now that you're explaining it, how it would be so beneficial in the schools as people are developing into adults. Having those skills would be so important for, not only like family life or friends or social situations, but as they go into the workplace or as they decide to start their own business, that those skills are so important.
Absolutely. That's why when I started the podcast, I have that workplace component, because it's not just in the schools. We want to prepare our children, our students, for life after school. That's the end result. So that's really where that piece came from.
Exactly. And you've said the podcast a couple times. Why don't you tell us the name of your podcast in case people would love to, listen to it?
Oh, thank you. It's Neuroscience Meets Social and Emotional Learning. And you could find it anywhere that you find a podcast. Look up Andrea Samadi. And that's really when I saw the connection between the brain and the social emotional learning, I thought I've got to create a platform just to get these ideas out to the world. And it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun to interview some really high quality guests, get their point of view for how life works in different areas, and expose more of this to more people.
Yeah. So over your 20 years of doing this, and then you said there was growing as you went along, was there any aha moments or awareness, something that really struck you that changed everything for you?
Well, absolutely. It was in the beginning. So in the beginning, probably when I was working with the speaker, and I saw him, we had just started working with teens with the material that he was teaching adults so successfully. And things like goal setting, confidence building, things that we now call social and emotional skills. He was teaching to these 12 kids as a challenge that he took on to see what would happen. And these kids, their results skyrocketed. And here I was as a school teacher trying so hard to have an impact on the kids in my classroom without any avail. It wasn't working out. And then I saw this man who had no teaching degree. He wasn't even very warm back then. So as he became a grandfather, he definitely became more relatable. I saw him change over the years. But at the time that he was working with these kids, he didn't have that warmth and connection. He was just teaching his ideas and still having a massive impact. So I thought, if he can do this, I just was blown away. It just hit me like it was like a brick got thrown at me. And it was a time when he went behind one of the students. There was this one student, his name was Brian. Never forget who he was. And he started to stutter as he was speaking his ideas. And these kids were presenting these ideas at the Louisiana Superdome. So right in front of an audience of 8,000. And this young kid was trying to explain what he was learning, and he started to stutter, and it was tough. We've all been there when we're young and was self-conscious. And the speaker went behind him and rubbed his back. And we now know that's a strategy because we have so many nerve endings on our back, it calms you down quickly. But he did that, and I remember just bawling my eyes out at that moment because I saw it is social emotional skills for a reason. We're connecting with people on different level. The kid was able to get through what he needed to say, and I just saw the speaker in a whole new light. He was teaching these kids and getting through without any understanding that. I think he was just trying it out and not knowing the impact that he was having. And then of course the results changed. The kids went from C grades to A grades, and I was like, this is what I need to do. This is it. I knew it. I was embarrassed because I had to go back and sell some books, and we were working with some celebrities at the time, and my face was all blotchy. I was like, bawling my eyes out still. I'm like, and everyone's like, what's up with this girl? And I'm like, oh, I just figured out that what I'm doing for the rest of my life. Don't mind me. But, it was definitely an aha moment I'll never forget.
That is a huge aha when you realize that. So many people wish that would just come down out of the sky. What's my meaning? What's my purpose? What am I supposed to do? And there it was for you.
Right. Yeah, very clear.
So, yeah. And do you have any advice on actually identifying your life path?
Yeah, you've got to just be aware and have your eyes open because, I've heard it many different ways. The ship, if you miss the ship, it's going to come back for you over and over again. So don't worry about, missing it, but just be aware of and listen to your body. When you feel something, it's normally a sign you're resonating with something, that this is a good fit for me. And if it doesn't feel right, listen, this isn't a good fit. So within those 20 years, it wasn't me always working the idea for full time for money. I did go and work with Pearson with a corporate job where I got a chance to see how educational products were sold and created, which really helped me when it was time for me to create and sell my products. So it was a good experience, but I also knew that sitting in a cubicle wasn't going to be the way that I could live and work and be happy for the rest of my life. So, I felt that. I knew, in order for me to do the best work, I have to have certain things in my life, and I wasn't happy long term. And it was clear in the end, my results, it showed you can't be a high performer in an environment that doesn't make you happy.
Yeah, exactly. At the same time, that cubicle was your school. It was your school, your classroom for a little while, because you learned the things that you needed once you got out. And a lot of us don't really want to sit in a classroom and learn, but we want the result of what we're learning. So everything
Absolutely.
has a purpose.
Absolutely. It was a great place too. I had a lot of support and mentorship. I had managers that saw probably that I had these ideas all over. They were all appearing, and they all urged me to still, even though I was doing my corporate job, still they urged me, well, what's that book you've got? Here's some more ideas for you. And they had their place and skyrocketed me at different points of my career.
Yeah, it's amazing to have that kind of support.
Definitely.
So you learned a lot about, the creative process and just really how to make, market, launch an idea into the marketplace. Would you like to talk a little bit about that? Because I know there's a lot of people that have ideas that they sure would love to launch.
Well, definitely. There's a few steps involved. So when you've got an idea, you want to mind map it out, put it down on paper. And I use this program called XMind. Whether it's creating a website, you want to map it out. Otherwise, it's all in your head and gets jumbled up. How do you know what you're building? I've also, if I move my camera, I don't even know if I can do this, but you can kind of see my walls are full of maps.
Uh-huh.
But I map everything out on my walls. They're always full of plans. And that's how I've always worked and lived. So I get those chart papers and you map everything out. So whether it's on a computer, on your walls, get everything out of your head and map it out. So that's really the first step, is to get your ideas on paper. And then you want to run your ideas past somebody that you trust, that, what do you think of these ideas? People in your industry that would know if they're going to work or not, and get feedback. They're either going to say these are great ideas or I'm not sure about this, but you want to really take these ideas and get feedback, because you might think they're great, but then people are like, I'm not too sure this is going to work. So you want to get some feedback on your ideas. Maybe even for me with the program in the beginning, I worked with some schools to get some feedback, work with some parents, some educators, and then ask, what do you think of this, before you want to really go big with an idea. And then, so once you've mapped it out, you've got some feedback, then you can start creating frameworks around it. Because if you've got an idea, it might be very confusing. I might have had, neuroscience meets social emotional learning sounds so confusing. But if you know that there's 6 competencies in social emotional learning, anyone who's an educator would know what those are. And then how do they fit with the brain? It starts to become easier to understand. It's not so confusing and all up in the air. So you've got to have some sort of framework of what it is you're doing that makes it easy. And a way that I heard this once described, there's a book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And I read it years ago, and it's about, this pain body that shows up in our life. And if we don't solve this pain body, then we're never going to have freedom. And I couldn't really explain this book to anybody. I actually reviewed it on Amazon, and it was kind of like, well, what is it again? What's this thing? But then if I was to review Covey's 7 Habits, which was one of the largest, most well distributed business book of all time, he had a clear framework of what these 7 habits were. So there's no mistake of what the 7 habits are and how to use them. But the power of now, what was it about? I could really only tell you one concept now. I couldn't remember for the rest of my life what it was about. So there was no framework in it. So that's really like an example of where I've thought you've got to have a clear framework. What is it that you're doing and how are you doing it? Make it clear for people so it's not confusing. And that's when you're ready. When you're ready, you've got some feedback. People say it's good, test it out. And just once you've launched it, the world will let you know what you need to change when it's out there.
Wow, that was so clear. You make it sound so simple. But I know if anything simple, there's always work. It's not easy. There's work behind it, but you just mapped it out for us.
Absolutely. And I actually went to a class, and I have a trophy somewhere. It was a class done by someone that worked for Tony Robbins, and it was called the Make, Market, Launch It class. And that's really where I got that framework from, that there's a process involved before you, when you make a product, before you market and launch it, there's a process. So if anyone wants to Google Make, Market, Launch It, there's a PDF that's out on the internet world, and you could find that and just see the steps that are involved. And that's really what I followed when I launched my online product with the school. So I didn't make it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you described it quite well. So thank you. So in your personal life, what gives you the most happiness or fulfillment?
Definitely. Well, if I think about this answer, you know, the typical answer that people usually say is, you know, my work and my family. But, you know, if I think about it, it's not just that for me. I need a little bit more. In order to be a good mom and a good wife, I need my exercise and my meditation in the morning to make me feel right. And if I don't do that, if I don't get up and do that work on myself, there's a clear difference of who I show up in the world as, and life isn't the way that I want it to be. So I definitely need that time. And then I'm a better mom to my kids, and a better wife, better at my work. And I heard once from one of my mentors back in the day when I was launching all my programs, he said, you know, I'm going to give you some advice, but I don't want you to just focus on being a mom and raising your kids. I want you to focus on what your talents and strengths are and making an impact in the world. And I heard it loud and clear, because if I had just focused on raising my kids and being a good mom, there's a time when they grow up and they start needing you less. And then it's like, what am I doing? What's my purpose? And that's when a lot of us have that, you know, midlife thoughts of, well, what am I supposed to be doing with myself? But if you're very clear with what you're supposed to be doing and build it along the way, divide your time between your kids and your passions, then you're not lost when the kids move away. And so that advice, I think, was really good. I remember when I had my first child, and I did an interview with a celebrity for a magazine I was building. And I had one of my friends from high school say, you know, you should really just be focused on raising your kids. Why are you doing this work? And I heard it and I thought, well, I'm doing this work because I want to be happy in the long run. I don't want to just be pigeonhole myself as a mom, focused, and you know, I wanted to take that advice to heart. And so I've always thought, no matter what it is, you've got to find out what your passion is, how you're going to contribute to the world. It might be making quilts and giving them to your church. I don't know what it is. For me, it was always taking information, making it easier, and teaching it to the world. So figure out what it is, and then divide your time so that you're a better mom, wife, and contributor to society. And so I'd say that's what makes me the happiest, to know that I'm doing my best in as many areas as I can.
Yeah, that is wonderful. And as you were talking, I was thinking about that, you know, we also want to be role models for our kids. And it's totally fine to be a dedicated stay-at-home mom. But if there's something inside of you that was given to you to give to the world, and you're not giving it, then, you know, what kind of a role model is that?
Yeah, and you'll feel it. There'll be a pull. You know what you want to do. And so I remember changing diapers, and had the headset on, and I was learning a class on coding. And I remember I disconnected myself from the class because my arm hit something. I was in a Skype class, and the guy was like, "Are you really quitting?" I'm like, "No, I'm changing a diaper." But that's what I had to do at the time. You know, I had to be a mom, and I think he was that teenager guy. And so he was like, "What are you doing?" And like, yeah, I have a life outside of learning to code. I'm doing this, but bear with me. Put me back in the class. And so absolutely, you will be pulled if you don't do what you're meant to do. So you'll be doing your everyday life, and you'll have this pull of what you're supposed to do. You'll know.
That's awesome advice. Awesome insight. So I know a lot of people would love to find out about your program, what you offer. So why don't you tell us, you told us about the podcast, but I know you have a website. Why don't you tell us about what you offer, how people find it, who you can help?
Definitely. If you go to achieveit360, that's my website. And there's programs for the schools, for students and educators. There's also programs for the workplace. I have a book, the Level Up book. Got one here. There's a teacher manual and an online portal that goes along with the book and the lessons. And that's really what we've got at Achieve It 360. Take a look. And the podcast will be my next book. That's what I'm working on now. It's really connecting the science to social emotional learning, which will be the next version of what we're doing.
Awesome. And I'll make sure and put that in the show notes so people can find you. And I just want to tell you, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and for everything you're giving back to the world. Because that's changing all of society, the things that you're doing. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. And before we get off, what is your best advice for living a life of happiness, fulfillment, most incredible life?
Definitely. It would be to first of all know your values. I think it starts there. If you know your values, then everything else comes into play. You know, when you're asked, do you want to do this? You got to see, well, does it align with my highest values? So I know my highest values are starting with health. So if it doesn't align with health, you know, if they were to say, you know, do you want to take this job and it would require you working, 15 hours at a desk, I couldn't exercise, I couldn't do it. So once you know what your values are, then you can make decisions easier, and have your values in clear sight. So figuring out what your values are, it's really thinking about, well, what do I want in my life and what don't I want in my life? I think that's the key, is to know what your values are. And once you know what your values are, then you can figure out the things that are for you or not for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you again for being on the podcast. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.